June 14, 2026. MetLife Stadium. Final whistle. Brazil 1, Morocco 1. A draw nobody in the Brazilian camp wanted against an opponent ranked 30 places below them. On the bench, still in his warm-up bib, sits a 19-year-old who scored the winning goal against Egypt in the final warm-up friendly before the tournament. A player Real Madrid paid €60 million for at 16. A player who broke Raúl's Champions League scoring record at Real Madrid. A player who, by every reasonable measure of recent form, looked like exactly the kind of spark Brazil needed against a stubborn Moroccan defense. He did not play a single minute. Within hours, Brazilian football media had a single question circulating: what is wrong with Endrick? 3 days later, the answer came from a voice nobody could dismiss. Not a pundit, not a former teammate, a two-time World Cup winner, the man whose number Endrick was specifically signed to one day inherit. Ronaldo Nazário stepped in front of the cameras and said something that wasn't really about Endrick at all. It was about a sentence Brazilian football has been trying not to say out loud for over a decade. To understand why one unused substitute appearance became a national conversation, you have to understand what Endrick represents, and it isn't really about him as an individual player. Endrick Felipe Moreira de Sousa was born in Taguatinga, a suburb of Brasília, into genuine poverty. His father filmed his goals on YouTube as a child, hoping a scout would notice. One did. Palmeiras signed him at 11. By 16, he was the youngest player to ever appear for the club's first team, and weeks later, the youngest goal scorer in the history of Brazilian Serie A. Real Madrid agreed to sign him in December 2022, while he was still 16 years old, 2 years before he'd even arrive, for a fee in the region of €60 million. The biggest sale in Brazilian football history at the time. Here's the detail that explains everything that followed. Real Madrid's chief scout for South America, Juni Calafat, is the same scout who discovered Vinicius Jr. and Rodrygo. Real Madrid did not sign Endrick because he was a promising teenager. They signed him because their most trusted scouting pipeline told them he was the heir to a position Brazilian football has always treated as sacred. The number 9. The position of Pelé, of Romario, of Ronaldo Nazário himself. And in Brazil, that position does not just measure footballing talent. It carries the weight of a question the entire country has been unable to answer cleanly since 2002. Who is next? July 27, 2024. Santiago Bernabéu Stadium. Endrick is officially presented as a Real Madrid player. The tactical reality behind that unveiling is more complicated than the photos suggested. Real Madrid did not sign Endrick to be an immediate starter. They signed him into a forward line that already contained Mbappé, Vinicius Jr., Rodrygo, and Bellingham, arguably the most stacked attacking quartet in world football. The plan from day one was development through patience. A long-term investment, not an instant fix. Endrick's first season told that story exactly as written. He scored on his La Liga debut as a substitute. He broke Raúl's 29-year-old Champions League youngest starter record in October 2024. But across the full season, his minutes were scarce, and a player used to being the focal point of every Palmeiras attack found himself fighting for scraps of game time behind some of the most expensive forwards on the planet. By January 2026, Real Madrid made a decision that, in isolation, looked like a demotion. They loaned him to Lyon for the second half of the season. It wasn't a demotion. It was a tactical recalibration, the realization that Endrick needed minutes, rhythm, and a system built around him, not around someone else, to arrive at the World Cup in form rather than in theory. The gamble paid off in the most literal sense. At Lyon, Endrick contributed to 16 goals in 21 appearances. He scored a hat-trick against Metz. He earned his World Cup call-up off the back of that form specifically. The decision had worked. The question was whether Brazil's coaching staff would actually use what they developed. Here's what made the Morocco game different from a normal squad rotation decision. Carlo Ancelotti started Igor Thiago, fresh off finishing second in the Premier League's Golden Boot race with 22 goals for Brentford as Brazil's central striker. Vinicius Jr. played wide, with the freedom to drift inside. In the second half, with the game still level, Ancelotti turned to Matheus Cunha, the Manchester United forward, rather than Endrick. Thiago struggled. By most assessments, he had one of the most difficult 90 minutes of his career, unable to link play or create danger in the Moroccan half. Cunha's introduction added energy, but didn't change the result. Brazil were, by most independent accounts, the second-best team on the pitch against a nation they had never lost to, but had also never beaten. And through all 90 minutes, plus stoppage time, Endrick remained on the bench in his warm-up gear. Former Brazil international Felipe Melo, working as a television analyst that night, said on air that he was confused why Endrick hadn't been given a chance. The question wasn't really about tactics anymore. It had become a referendum on what Brazil's coaching staff actually believed about their most talked-about teenager. Ancelotti, when pressed directly after the match about why Endrick didn't feature, deflected entirely. "I am not here to speak about individuals," he said. "Only the team." That answer satisfied almost nobody, and it left a vacuum that, within 48 hours, somebody else was going to fill. When a 19-year-old gets criticized after a World Cup non-appearance, the standard response from Brazilian football culture is predictable. Pundits divide into camps, fans flood social media, and the player's name becomes a trending topic for 48 hours before the next controversy replaces it. This time was different because of who chose to respond. Ronaldo Nazário did not need to weigh in. He had no contractual obligation, no media appearance scheduled around defending a teammate, no personal stake in the outcome of Brazil's group stage. He is, by any measure, one of the most credible authorities in the history of the sport, a two-time World Cup winner, a former Ballon d'Or recipient 3 times over, the player whose statistical and stylistic legacy Endrick has been compared to since he was 14 years old. Speaking on the television program Resenha da Copa, Ronaldo addressed the Endrick question directly, and in doing so, he didn't just defend a player. He explained, with the authority of someone who has lived inside a Brazilian World Cup squad as both wonder kid and senior star, exactly how this kind of moment actually works. "I'm sure his opportunity will come," Ronaldo said. "He'll get on the pitch at some point, but right now he's the third option in attack. There's Igor Thiago, there's Matheus Cunha, and then there's him." That sentence alone reframed the entire conversation. Not Endrick isn't good enough. Third in a queue of 3 legitimate options, which, in a squad assembled by one of the most successful managers in club football history, is not an insult. It's a statement about depth. But Ronaldo wasn't finished. And the next part of what he said is the detail that actually mattered. "He's on the same level as Matheus Cunha and Igor Thiago," Ronaldo continued. "We're very well covered in that position." Read that claim carefully, because it's doing something specific. Ronaldo wasn't grading Endrick on potential or future promise, or what he might become in 4 years. He was placing him, in the present tense, at the same level as a Manchester United forward, and a player who had just finished runner-up for the Premier League's Golden Boot. That is not the language used to soften a disappointment. That is the language used to describe genuine squad depth. And then Ronaldo revealed the tactical detail that had been missing from the entire public conversation. "I think he would have played against Morocco if Bruno Guimaraes hadn't been injured." That detail was crucial because Ancelotti was going for the win. Brazil's plan, according to Ronaldo, had specifically included Endrick as part of the attacking changes Ancelotti wanted to make in the final stretch of the match. Guimaraes picking up an injury forced Ancelotti to rework his substitutions on the fly, using a change to shore up midfield rather than add attacking firepower. In other words, the absence wasn't a verdict on Endrick's readiness. It was a single in-game contingency triggered by an injury to a completely different player that happened to be the difference between Endrick getting his World Cup debut and not. Nobody outside the dressing room knew that detail until Ronaldo said it publicly. And once he did, the entire narrative that had built up over 72 hours, Endrick isn't trusted, Endrick isn't ready, Endrick isn't good enough, collapsed under a piece of information that had simply never been shared. So why had it taken a 2-time World Cup champion, rather than the coaching staff themselves, to explain it? Step back from the specifics of one substitution for a moment, because there's a bigger pattern here, and it's the pattern that makes this story matter beyond a single World Cup group match. Brazil has not won a World Cup since 2002, the tournament where a 25-year-old Ronaldo Nazário scored 8 goals and lifted the trophy as the best player in the world. 24 years is the longest title drought in the history of a footballing nation that has won more World Cups than anyone else on earth. And across those 24 years, Brazilian football has repeatedly searched for a single, defining number 9 to anchor the national team, the way Ronaldo, Romario, and Pelé once did. Several players have carried that pressure publicly, and the comparisons start absurdly early. Endrick was being compared to Gabriel Jesus by age 14. He was carrying Ronaldo's statistical shadow before he'd even left Palmeiras academy. That pressure doesn't disappear because a manager makes a tactical substitution decision in a group stage draw. If anything, it intensifies it. Every minute Endrick doesn't play becomes, in the public imagination, evidence for or against an entire generational question that has nothing to do with him personally and everything to do with Brazilian football's unresolved anxiety about its own succession plan. Ronaldo understood that better than anyone speaking publicly that week because he lived through a version of that same pressure himself, as a teenager being compared to the World Cup winners who came before him. When he defended Endrick, he wasn't just defending a player's place in rotation. He was defending the idea that this kind of pressure doesn't need to be resolved in one match against Morocco in the opening game of a tournament that still had at least 4 more matches to go. Here is the moment that crystallizes everything this story is actually about. Ronaldo, asked to comment on a 19-year-old who didn't play a single minute in a disappointing draw, chose his words with the precision of someone who understood exactly what was at stake in the public response, not just for Endrick, but for the psychological climate around an entire World Cup campaign. But listen, he said, he is ready. Forget it. He's ready. 3 short sentences. No hedging. No qualifier about potential or development or patience. A direct, unambiguous statement of present-tense readiness from the most decorated number 9 in Brazilian football history, aimed squarely at silencing a narrative that had built entirely without access to the information that actually mattered. And then, almost as an afterthought, he turned the conversation toward where Brazil's real focus needed to be. Not one player's missing minutes against Morocco, but the must-win match against Haiti that was coming next, and the importance of goal difference in a group that suddenly looked far less comfortable than anyone had expected. That pivot was deliberate. Ronaldo wasn't trying to make this story bigger. He was trying to make it smaller, to return the conversation to the team, the group stage, the tournament that still had everything to play for. The irony is that by doing so in defending Endrick with such complete and immediate authority, he made the story briefly enormous. Because when the greatest number 9 in Brazilian football history tells you a 19-year-old is ready, you listen. Go back to where this story started. A 19-year-old in a warm-up bib, on the bench, at the final whistle of a 1-1 draw nobody wanted. That image, Endrick, unused, scrolling past on television broadcasts and social media clips for 72 hours, was never really about a single substitution decision. It was a flashpoint for something much older. Brazil's unresolved question about who picks up the number 9 shirt after Ronaldo, after Romário, after a generation of strikers who never quite matched the weight of that legacy. Ronaldo's intervention didn't resolve that larger question. It was never going to. What it did was something more specific and, in the moment, more necessary. It supplied the missing context, the Guimarães injury, the in-game contingency that turned an apparent snub into an ordinary football decision. And it placed Endrick, explicitly and publicly, on equal footing with 2 players already established at elite European clubs. Whether Endrick becomes the player who finally answers Brazil's 24-year question is a story that hasn't been written yet. It will be written in minutes still to come, against Haiti, against Scotland, and further into this tournament if Brazil advance far enough to need him. But for 1 week in June 2026, before any of those answers arrived, it took the most credible voice in Brazilian football history to say, simply, not yet doesn't mean not ready. Here's what I want to know from you. Was Ronaldo's defense the correct read of the situation? A tactical contingency turned into an overblown controversy? Or is there something deeper in how Brazil manages the pressure on its young forwards, comparing every promising teenager to a list of legends before they've had the chance to build their own identity? Tell me what you think in the comments.